Hello and welcome. My name is Trismegistus, and this video is a companion piece to the blog that I recorded while at the Space Age LAN party event. In this video I'm going to give you some more organised and complete thoughts, but I am still bound by the embargo. That means that this video is probably perfect for those who don't want any new spoilers. I will be mentioning things already covered in the Friday Facts, but who do want some thoughts, feelings and reactions about the expansion before you decide to buy it. Saying that, this is not a review, and what we played was a beta version that was a good few weeks out from release. That means some of the things I talk about will probably change. So, just to be clear, the game was still in development when I played it, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. I should also note that I was hoping to do this in my more heavily edited style that I've been experimenting with, but owing to time constraints, instead it's just going to be my disembodied voice. For video, I'll just show the officially provided B-roll on a loop. In this video I'm going to talk about the following: Nauvis gameplay, space platform gameplay, and Fulgora gameplay. But I'm not going to mention any new mechanics, just Friday Facts content and my thoughts, feelings and reactions to those. I'm also going to discuss some impressions I had for the experience on Gleba and the experience on Vulcanus. However, because I didn't play on those planets, I can't talk about how the gameplay felt to me, so you'll not get a planet ranking out of me just yet. Nauvis gameplay. I'm going to highlight some specific stuff on Nauvis that I didn't really talk about during my other video, but my main comment from the blog video does stand. I think you need to build a well-functioning, productive base on Nauvis before heading into space, and that means you need to spend a decent amount of time there, and that's one of the main reasons this makes it a really big game. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about building a mega base, but your goal needs to be that you can launch rockets pretty reliably and pretty regularly and not run out of the stuff to build and supply them. And I'm also going to lump in some quality of life stuff here, as it's pretty much all available from the get-go on Nauvis. So these are the things I didn't really cover in my blog video. Map generation change. Okay, I'm just going to say this, but the map generation change might be my favourite thing I encountered during the entire event. And of course this one is free for everybody. I'll talk about it more post-embargo, but if you're thinking of continuing your previous base or converting a save file, then I recommend having another think. Because the new map gen is so good, I think everyone should just start again, even if you're 1,000 hours into a megabase. Okay, well maybe not then, but it is very good. Cliffs now do what they're supposed to. I don't even want to blow most of them up. It creates visually interesting features, not just random shapes that look like a noise function. There are big areas of water that look like seas, with coastlines and dried up riverbeds that make it seem like there's topology. Trees grouped together like actual forests. They're not just blocks of trees that make no sense and are annoying. It's so much better. Just start a new game. The combat change. The combat change was really noticeable. When I was clearing out nests, I was actually struggling, and I'd say I'm pretty good at the combat in the game. What was funny at the event was that no one really said anything about struggling with the biters. It was like we were all just worried we weren't as good at the game as we thought we were. But the event started before the Friday Facts, and reading that through explained it all, and it made a lot of sense. I actually really like this change. It may sound like it makes the game harder, and it does, but it also makes biter clearance much more of a strategic decision. Do you clear them because the more you kill, the tougher you get? Or do you wait and do a few more buffs so you stay ahead of their power curve? But if you research those technologies, that will increase your pollution, so they may evolve more anyway. And things like efficiency modules start to make a bit more sense on Nauvis as a way of reducing your pollution. Remote view. This was really awesome and hugely powerful. I'm really glad it works well because it will be a key tool for managing bases across multiple planets. However, at the playtime it was a little janky in places, and I think most of my feedback was on this feature. Factoriopedia. The Factoriopedia is hugely useful. With the expansion, we're getting into the territory where there's just too much stuff and ways of doing things that it's very difficult to remember them all. Especially as there are now alternate recipes for some things, as they've shown in the Friday Facts. But more than that, it's just really useful to be able to alt-click on anything and bring it up in the Factoriopedia. It also links internally to everything, so you can just navigate around in a really intuitive way. It is basically spoiler central though, so if you want to discover stuff on your own, then you should avoid using it during your very first playthrough. But do be aware that if you don't use it, you may get a bit lost. Quality. We didn't really do a lot with quality, although more on this topic when I talk about Fulgora, but we did produce a few bits and pieces. And even small quality boosts felt powerful. However, I did end up feeling that it would create quite a complex sorting problem. That is, it feels like having all sorts of stuff at random quality levels could quickly clog up your bots and logistic networks if you're not careful. And as for keeping things in your inventory, well, yeah, that might be difficult. So, for example, if you make quality solar panels, you could end up with, in theory, 5 stacks of solar panels of different quality all coming out of the same machine. And that could be quite a lot to manage without any blockages. It did feel like there were quite a few viable strategies for making quality items though, but also that you may be best to decide what you actually want and need to be quality and focus on those, rather than trying to make your whole base quality. The recycler also feels like it is a key component for doing quality at scale, but that it is a viable tool and usable before you have that. Tiny quality of life stuff. A lot of the tiny quality of life bits and pieces just instantly made their way into my workflow. For example, the max range indicator. This makes building belts and pipes super smooth for those of us who like to make use of that max length of our undergrounds. Chart tags. Being able to edit, copy and paste map tags is amazing. Pins. Pins are good, but it is easy to get carried away and end up with dozens of arrows around the edge of the screen, which kinda defeats the point. Search everything. It's massively useful once you have it in your workflow to just know that you can Ctrl F and find anything in just about every menu and GUI. I say just about everything because I didn't actually try absolutely everything, but what I did search had this functionality. The only thing about it is you do need to search for the proper names, so no blue science, it has to be chemical science. Superforce build. No more messing about with blueprints that need landfill under them and need multiple clicks to build. Just press an extra button and away you go. Plus, Angry Ghost Guy. Removing landfill. This is so good, although apparently the engineers still can't master digging holes in the normal terrain. Alerts. The new alerts, for trains in particular, actually tell you what the problem is, and you can then fix it. It's almost like cheating. Fluids. No more messing about not understanding why this tank is full but that one isn't. It just works. The alerts GUI. It's really nice just to be able to see what is being alerted by just mousing over the indicator. However, there were a couple of things that have been revealed in the Friday Facts I wasn't entirely keen on. Contextual sounds in the inventory. I find some of these a little bit grating, and when I'm interacting a lot with my inventory and various menus, for me, personally, it can be a bit overwhelming. As I've discussed before, I have some audio sensitivities around sort of music and lots of sound, and I'm hoping that these inventory sounds will just become something that is in the background for me that I don't notice, but it has been a bit overloading. Also, some of the noises they picked are the same as the action noises. So for example, the RoboPorts make the RoboPort opening noise, and it can be a little bit confusing if you stood next to a bunch of RoboPorts and bots are going in and out, but you're also trying to pick them out of your inventory or put them in a chest or something like that. You end up with lots and lots of RoboPort opening noises and you don't know which is which. However, saying all that, the general changes to sound and having more ambient noises are good. Filters on inserters. This is kind of hyper specific, but in some ways this is better as it means less stuff in your inventory and extends filtering to all types of inserters, but it's a bit annoying to put down an inserter that you want to have a filter on, and before you set that filter, it's picked up the wrong thing, and then you have to clean out its hand and the chest it's put it in and all that sort of stuff. So I say, it's a bit of a mixed bag, this one. It's better, but also it can be a bit annoying. Elevated rails and the new rail angles. Elevated rails were, if I'm totally honest, a little bit fiddly to use, but they are really cool. They also worked really well with cliffs. I didn't really feel like I needed to get rid of cliffs because, as mentioned, the map gen makes them better, but also I could always hop over them with an elevated rail. They therefore work particularly well for point-to-point rail. So, when you're just bringing in resources from an outpost, being able to hop over a cliff or go straight across a sea or lake is amazing. However, I think that when you get to the full rail network stage, a complete set of full railway blueprints is going to kind of be a requirement to get the most out of them. Doing everything by hand is just too fiddly. The new rail angles were a mixed bag, if I'm honest. It did seem to allow a lot more flexibility, and it did produce what I would call as more organic looking rails, but the curves are also noticeably bigger and, in my experience, didn't really play well with the large power pole length. It feels like they needed to be a couple of tiles longer to really work with the new curves. Of course, quality power poles do have a longer reach, I believe, so maybe that's a solution, but it seems like quite an expensive way of fixing the problem. I did also start to build a few proper junctions, but I would say that the number of permutations quickly overwhelmed me. You now have far more directions that any piece of rail can travel in, so I just ended up with straights and right angle curves. I did also start to build a few basic junctions like T-junctions and branches and things like that, but the number of permutations quickly overwhelmed me. Because you can have far more directions that a rail can travel in, that means far more pieces of the puzzle to put together. As such, I just ended up with lots of straights and right angle curves, so it felt like I wasn't really taking full advantage of what it offers. However, just to be clear, I think it'll be a lot of fun to make those blueprints, but I also think it will take quite a time to get them together. Rail interrupts. While this was in the game and I did take a look at it, I didn't actually do anything with it, and still haven't, to be honest. As I've said on my most recent streams, it did feel like a really useful tool, but only when you get to the stage where it's viable. So, early game when you're doing point-to-point rail, to bring in a few resources, it isn't really needed. I mean, why set up interrupts for a train that's on a dedicated line going back and forth to a single mining outpost? It doesn't even make sense, let alone being worth it. However, when I think you're doing your dedicated rail network, particularly for those of you who like to do city blocks, I think it will be quite a useful tool. But I also think it's optional. I think if you know enough about circuits and other ways of doing things, then your current approaches still work and are viable. The rest. So there were a few other things I wanted to try or to look at during the LAN, but I didn't actually get the chance to. These included circuit networks. I've been playing with this in my single player game after the event, and I do have some thoughts, but I'll leave them to later. The wires staying attached when you move the combinators is really nice though. Logistics groups. I personally didn't do much with this in the LAN, but again, I have used it a lot in my current game, and it's pretty cool. Productivity researches. I wanted to see how powerful these actually were, but didn't really even get to look at them. Although I would note that we did actually do a lot of these researches, I just never really was involved in it and I didn't look at the effects properly of it. But looking at the tech tree in my current playthrough, they do seem like they're going to be really powerful. Parameterization. I wanted to at least look at this, and there is this button that you can press to parameterize a blueprint, but I didn't even click on it. The display panel. I didn't use this during the event, but I was really keen on it. However, if I'm going to be totally honest, I found it a little underwhelming. The problem I'm having is that I want to be able to set it more dynamically than seems to be possible. Maybe I'm just using it wrong, but it feels very manual in how you use it. And most places that I have used it, I don't really need it. So what I want to do is have a display that says the number of bits of coal at my coal station, but it can't really do that without a lot of messing around. It's difficult to explain without showing you it sort of in-game, and it does feel like it's almost there, but it's not sort of complex enough in its functionality to do what I actually want it to do. I don't know, maybe when I get round to having a bigger base it'll be more useful. And I'll be honest, I think this is more that I set my own expectations a lot higher than it actually describes in the Friday Facts, so the mismatch here is more what I had in my head versus what it actually does. Space platform gameplay. The space platforms is a really difficult topic to cover at this stage, meaning pre-embargo, because you know very little about some of the key topics, and what I can say about them probably won't make a lot of sense without the context. But let's give this a go. Platform building. I actually found the building of the platforms wasn't so bad. Getting started with building one was confusing though. Because I've done a bit of programming in my career, and because of the type of programmer I was, I quite enjoy a try it and see approach, and building the platforms was a bit like that. Put together a design, try it out, realise you've done everything wrong, tear it down and try again. And the system really supports this approach. It does have some quirks though, but I've no idea if those are intended things or they'll get changed before release. I did find it was fun to do overall though. Platform logistics. The platform logistics, I'll be honest, I found a bit confusing. It's one of those systems where I can see what they were going for, and it does work when you get your head around it, but it's a bit unclear when you first try to use it. It could really have done with some more specific tutorializing. Now they have hugely expanded the tips and tricks, so maybe there's more in there, and what I should have done is just take a look at that. But as I say, as a first contact experience I did find it a little confusing. Now I'm guessing they will work on this, but I certainly felt it was a little bit unintuitive at the moment. What I would say, and this really won't make any sense, is it didn't seem to quite offer as much choice for how to do things as I would have liked. One of the things I love in Factorio is that you can find your way to do things, and it's just as valid a solution as something someone else does. The platform logistics as presented didn't really seem to embrace that ethos, as it only seemed to have one real solution. Because I can't really go into detail, that probably won't really make any sense, and I also don't want to start any sort of panic. The way it's done is fine, it's more that in the version we had in the LAN party, there was only that one way of doing it, and I'd have liked more. Fulgora gameplay. As noted in the blog, Fulgora is the planet I went to, and I had an absolute blast there, working out the mechanics and making some electromagnetic science. Lightning. The lightning is not that big of a problem, especially if you have some shields on, but it doesn't take that many strikes before you need to find a lightning rod for shelter. However, the frequency of strikes does mean it's a really plentiful source of power, though you do have to be careful about managing it. Scrap sorting. The scrap sorting is really where the recycler comes in, but the percentage-based recycling does make for an interesting balancing act. Because I was pretty much bootstrapping Fulgora, I was using belts with filters, and I was constantly having to implement fixes and tweaks as the amount of things I had would vary quite a lot. It felt a lot like bots and circuit networks would be quite powerful tools here, but, of course, bots are quite power hungry. I really enjoyed how the scrap worked. Initially, it was quite weird to be taking high-level ingredients and turning them into the stuff that's super abundant on other planets. But once you get your head around it, it's a fun challenge, particularly around balancing those outputs. As I say, it's percentage-based, so you can't really be fully sure how much you'll have of anything at any one time. But then you also have a building that's great for getting rid of unwanted stuff. The recycler. The recycler itself is quite an interesting building to work with. Although we're getting bigger manufacturing buildings from several of the planets, they're all still basically square, and this isn't. It also outputs directly onto a belt, so it leads to some quite interesting designs. It's also input agnostic, so it will literally just recycle whatever you put into it. So that can lead to either a lot of accidental recycling, or it can make cleanup really easy. It does feel very weird to be deliberately getting rid of things like blue circuits though, something you would struggle to produce in high volumes everywhere else. Oil sands. The mechanic of pumping heavy oil out of the oil sands works really well. You actually get a surprising amount of water when you look at the percentages, so it's actually really quite easy to crack the oil, and I think that's deliberate so that you can make rocket fuel really easily. The recycling gives you low density structures and blue circuits directly, so having a quick and easy way to make rocket fuel, which is solid fuel plus light oil obviously, makes a lot of sense. It also makes the getting things off planet challenge pretty easy on Fulgora. Elevated rails. I know elevated rails are technically optional, but as we suspected during all the speculation, Fulgora is going to be a real pain if you don't use them. It's really your best way of moving things between the plateaus in bulk. You can do bots across smaller gaps obviously, but until you get things like the super landfill that they've mentioned, rail is really your only option. And if you're thinking about doing separate builds on each plateau, remember that you've only got one hub, so if it's going off planet, it needs to get to that hub in the end. The Electromagnetic Plant. The Electromagnetic Plant, or EMP, is amazing. I don't know that I can fully express how amazing it is to get a 50% prod bonus on things you never used to get any prod bonus on. I mean, this thing can even build copies of itself with a 50% prod bonus. In other words, if you build 2 EMPs, you get a third one free. It's so awesome at making free things that cost a lot of resources, I was actually super careful about letting it fully complete its craft cycle before picking it up. I didn't want to lose half of a free EMP just for picking up a building. The Tesla turret. The Tesla turret was interesting. I unlocked it at the very end of the LAN, so I only really got to use it a little bit, because it was so late and we were doing some special end stuff. When I was on Nauvis, I was testing it against big and behemoth biters, and its main benefit seemed to be the stun. This allowed other turrets to blast the biters without needing to worry too much about taking damage. The handgun version was also super fun, and it's a really cool effect, but it again feels like it's maybe more powerful against lower level enemies. If this thing has a stun effect against the recently revealed demolishers, then it could be really useful in that fight as well. I suspect, though I didn't check, that it probably has some damage buffs as well. Music. I'll be honest, this was the only thing I didn't really like about my time on Fulgora. When we heard the music tracks originally, I mentioned that the type of music on the Fulgora part of the soundtrack wasn't sounding like my cup of tea. And this proved to be the case. The problem for me was that some of the music was electronica, and that's music I just don't really like. And it also strayed into a sort of experimental jazz style that I find quite difficult to have as a background music. I have discussed on videos and streams before that I can't have music on in most games, and a part of that is that the music can be intrusive because I end up actively listening to it, and that diverts part of my attention, and that can be unpleasant for me. This music was like that. I ended up listening to it because it was too complex, and I don't really want to listen to it. I want it to fade away, and then every so often when I hear a bit I love, it suddenly draws my attention, makes me happy, and then I go back to the game. It didn't really have that effect, but maybe I'll get used to it, or maybe not. The experience on Vulcanus. Again, I didn't go to Vulcanus, so can only talk about this one based on what I heard. First off, the foundry almost felt broken. In the same way that the productivity bonus for the MP gives you a ridiculous amount of stuff, the foundry does too, but because it's using this lava mechanic, which is infinite, never declines in volume like oil, and you can just pump it around, it's even easier to deal with. The cliffs are apparently quite frustrating to build around, but I think that's a mileage may vary thing, and the whole worms destroy cliffs thing was not something I think anyone realised or used. There was also a little bit of feedback I heard that it could be a bit difficult to find the edges of coal patches in some places, because the contrast isn't great. Think of a black oil on a black lava. But I'm not sure everyone knew about or was using the map search functionality. The fact that recent Friday Facts covered Biggest Wormus means I can talk about that a little bit too. While I can't give any details, as Arundel says in the Friday Facts, the way in which the territory and combat was communicated to players was a bit lacking and confusing, and led to quite a lot of frustration from the players. But that does obviously come with a caveat that it had literally just been introduced. As I mentioned in my commentary on the Friday Facts video, it came across in places as a bit random, that one time it would do one thing and the next time it would do something different. But there are two reactions I would like to convey to the worms. Firstly, encountering the worms for the first time was quite an experience. There was lots of shock and running away. And secondly, fighting them was fun and quite a nice challenge. It forced you to find a good tactic and to execute it well. The experience on Gleba. Ah yes, our squishy and squelchy friend Gleba. As noted, I did not play on Gleba at the event, but some of my teammates did, as well as others at the event that I spoke to. The impression that I got from them was that the spoilage mechanic sounded interesting to play with, but took quite a lot of trial and error to get used to. To me, that sounds like an interesting thing to optimise, but it also sounds like it could get quite frustrating, as it seems like it could create punishing cascade failures. So, for example, one belt gets stuck or polluted, and then stuff backs up, and suddenly your short spoilage life items all go off. Then lots of your belts are polluted. That causes everything to grind to a halt, and within no time at all, everything is completely spoiled, and you've basically got a big clean-up job. Whether that's really the case, and whether I'll find it fun, I can't say, but it is certainly different to how the current game works. You may also have heard some negative commentary about the planet, and I wanted to dig into that a little bit. For me personally, there are two aspects to each planet. Firstly, there's the mechanics, which is how you do the manufacturing on that planet, and secondly, there is the rewards, what you get for doing it. The first of these, on Gleba, is the spoilage mechanic. Now, whether you find that fun to work with is distinct from what you get from going there, but it's also intrinsically linked. So, if what you get does not feel as useful or powerful from one planet, you may not feel that it's as worthwhile an experience as the other planets. And for me, looking at the tech tree as it was during the event, and thinking about the complexity of the spoilage mechanic, that's where Gleba felt like it was. Not really worth the effort for a first planet. And that last part is the most important. Not really worth going there first. Now for someone else, they may love the spoilage mechanic, and they may really like the rewards. So for them, it's a more worthwhile choice. But for me, at that time, not so much. And I can kind of explain what I mean from the Friday facts, but do please note that this is not the whole picture. I'm forcing this a bit to illustrate the point, as there is more to it. Anyway, you already know that you get the following. On Vulcanus, you get the foundry and big mining drill. These provide awesome productivity boosts for mining-based resources and intermediates. It also works great on other planets, and we've seen it plenty of times on platforms. Fulgora, you get the Electromagnetic Plant and the Recycler. These have awesome productivity and utility boosts for circuits and quality. They're great when used on other planets, Nauvis especially. Gleba, a way to plant trees, the arm, and to process fruit, the biolab. They basically stated that these are useless elsewhere. Now, as I say, that doesn't tell you everything, there is more to it, but it's a good illustration of the problem I was feeling. It's not necessarily that the Gleba mechanics are bad, or even that the arm and biolab are bad as such, it's just that you're assessing which planet to go to first. Unless you think the other things there, which obviously I can't tell you about, are worth it, and maybe you do, then the key new manufacturing buildings that you know about on the other planets are just better. But of course, if you think spoilage or fighting pentapods is super fun, then that will also sway your opinion. But that's entirely up to you. Conclusion. And that's it. This one was a bit more to the point, as I found I can't really talk about what I experienced based on the Friday facts. There's a lot more in the game that is yet to be revealed, and some of it is amazing in both big and small ways, but you just have to wait and see. I'm planning to do a question and answer type video when the embargo lifts, and I can talk about everything. Well, except for the final planet and endgame, they'll have to wait until after release day. So, if you have any questions about version 2 or Space Age, please post them in the community blog post that's linked in the description below, and I'll answer as many as I can in that video. I've also got some special live streams planned for the QA and also for release day, so stay tuned for more details on that. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and might consider coming back for another one. I live stream Factorio every weekend over on my Twitch channel @Trismegistus, so why not pop in for a chat? I've been Trismegistus, this has been Factorio Space Age. Thanks for watching. Cheers.